Welcome to the lecture on Chapter 3 of John Dewey's Reconstruction in Philosophy. This chapter is entitled The Scientific Factor in Reconstruction, and I want you to note at the beginning of this chapter the almost psychoanalytic opening to the chapter. There's this idea that philosophy starts from deep responses, and it grows when it transforms its response into a more conscious and articulate kind of material. And that allows it to gain control over itself and to gain control over life. It's very hard, he says, to recall what the old view of the world was like. He says, but we have to. We have to try to think about what it was like to think about the world before if we're going to extirpate the remnants of that world. It's a worldview which is preventing our growth in many ways, and we have to sort of recall childhood memories in order to expunge adult neuroses. So there's a very psychoanalytic tone to the beginning of this chapter. And Dewey says that one way we can accomplish this is by comparing what happened in ancient science and what happened in modern science. So in ancient science, you have a picture of the world. The world is closed. There's a limited number of fixed forms. There are very definite external boundaries. These are externally observable, externally controllable, maybe not by humans, but in principle. The ultimate causes are final. They specify the nature of things. Okay? Change exists, but it is a kind of imperfection. Right? And Dewey is thinking primarily of Western science here in these lectures, so I should just mention that. So you might say that this is a kind of model of the universe that is aesthetic. It's feudal, right? F-E-U-D-A-L. It's aesthetic in the sense that it has to hang together. It has to have a kind of perfection in aesthetic ways. In contrast, the science which comes after it, modern science, has a much different kind of world. It's an open world. It's much more plastic. It's much more changeable. It doesn't have necessarily fixed boundaries. It may be hard to know, right, how it's controlled, where its complexities stop. It seems to be infinitely complex. And change as it exists in the modern scientific picture is quite normal, right? It's not an aberration to be explained away. It is a phenomena to be explained. So the model in the modern scientific picture is much more, you might say, decentered. It's much more manipulable. It's much more democratic in a way. So Dewey is painting a picture here where intellectual change can be understood by societal change in scientific models, right? And we can understand some of this change by analogy between changes in scientific models with changes in our social life, in our religious life, in our economic spheres, right? There's a picture where there are laws which govern the phenomena we experience. And if they are inflexible, well, this is a feature, right? It doesn't have a divine origin. So if something strange happens, we don't say God is playing a trick on us. We say we can't explain it and we've got to try to figure it out. It's a mystery to be solved, right? It's not a sign of a certain kind of personality quirk or personality expression on the universe's part. There are methods that we can use to understand what happens. And so Dewey in this part of the chapter contrasts different methods of understanding the phenomena all around us. There's reflection and abstraction on the one hand, and then on the other hand, there are methods where we handle things, where we pull them apart, where we investigate, where we experiment. And so the rise of pragmatism and instrumentalism, or the scientific way of thinking which succeeds the earliest forms of modern science, they proceed by not only taking up some of the methods that modern science advances, keeping them and refining them, but pragmatism and instrumentalism are also going to overturn something very deep, what we might call a sort of two-realm picture of the universe. And it sets up instead what we might call a democracy of individual facts. Now that's a lot, so I want to recap a little bit here. So in order to reconstruct philosophy, Dewey is proposing that we take the next democratic step, that we resolve certain dualisms and we work through them, such as the dualism between facts on the one hand and values on the other. And we can do this by criticizing the dogmas that are remnants, even in modern science, and then we can apply experimental methods to morality and social life and continue the project that he started to discuss at the end of the last chapter. I think it's very important in understanding Dewey's emphases here to understand that he's not proposing that we worship science, right? He thinks that science has a lot to teach us, but it's not worshipful because we want to use the techniques of science, the abstraction, the analysis, the reduction, the substitution. We want to use these various tools as indispensable methods for understanding and coping with the world, including moral problems. But we don't think that they necessarily get at the real world or the world that is somehow there for us to discover. Right? He wants to remove that kind of ontological baggage of thinking that there's the realm of appearance and then the realm of reality, and these new scientific tools can start to uncover the realm of reality. Right? He thinks everything, we're in the real world already. Right? So you have to understand, when you're talking about Dewey and you're talking about science, you have to understand science is not necessarily being completely identical with the physical sciences or with the social sciences. Science, in Dewey's way of using the term, is something more general. Because the physical or the social sciences are instances of science, or scientific thinking, you might say. And there are other instantiations which are possible. And some of these instantiations, Dewey is suggesting, is philosophical, right? Philosophy can be an experimental discipline, much in the same way that science, in the various sciences, right? Chemistry, biology, physics, and so forth, they have also been experimental, right? And even ordinary life can be a site for experimental practice. And you see him putting this into practice all over the place in his educational theories. He even calls his school the lab school, right? Dewey's school is the lab school, because there students and teachers together are going to try experiments to learn things together, right? So there's a collaboration that's deeply built into education, and it comes out of this sort of this progression of different kinds of scientific thinking that he's laying out in the Reconstruction in philosophy. So I think we just end with a warning here that Dewey's scientific model, or his idea of science, really cannot be reduced to whatever sciences were current in his time or whatever sciences are current in our time, especially the physical sciences. Because if you do that, you're going to reduce Dewey to a scientistic thinker, right? Someone who thinks that the scientific method is all that you need in order to understand experience. What Dewey saw in science and also in technology were powerful intellectual tools and methods that could help us get a handle on experience, to help us get a handle on social and moral problems in ways that we hadn't yet tried, and ways in which he thought we really should try. So that's the end of the lecture on Chapter 3 of Reconstruction in Philosophy. I hope it's been helpful to you, and I look forward to talking to you about it.